Hey guys, and welcome to /Rex Games. This is going to be part 3 of my native studio networking tutorial series. Last time we went over player registration, so in this one I'm going to be going over player login. So to manage our objects a little bit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here into our menus folder, and I'm going to create a folder group called common. Alright, cool. So we're going to move some stuff into common. Basically, when I do create my login objects, I'm going to be using the password 1 again and the username again. So everything we need is pretty much here. So I'm going to move this parent into common. I'm going to move the username into common and the password 1 into common. Cool. So that means I can create another folder over here called login. Awesome. So the only object that we need to add that we don't already have is some sort of login button. So here under sprites, I've already added our resource called sprite button login. There we go, it looks pretty much the same as the register, only it says login instead. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff right over there. Okay, so I'm going to be creating our object, and we're going to be calling this object btn login. Alright, awesome stuff. So it's going to have an add, mouse, left pressed event. Let's drag in some code. Actually, we can go to register, copy this whole thing, put it over here, go into there. Some things we should do. Okay, so we need the username and password 1. We don't need this one. Get rid of that one. And this bit of validation is still pretty good, so we can keep it there. That's really awesome. That's going to save us some time. Cool, so let's remove this line 13 and 14, as well as these. And let's remove the indentation on this. Change this to try login. Remove that empty line. So we'll only get to lines 13 and below if this validation passes. See, that's what this exit means. It's going to jump out of this event if something goes wrong. So what's the difference between a login and a register? Well, very little actually. In our registration, we were sending our username as well as a password hash. And when we're logging in, well, we're still sending our username so it knows where to check a password, and we're still sending a password hash. Exactly the same stuff. So this little bit over here is exactly the same. We are grabbing our username, we are grabbing our password, we are hashing that password using the SHA1 method, and then we're going to be sending stuff. Cool, so we're going to seek to the beginning of our buffer. I'm going to send a 3 for a player login request because a 2 was a registration. We're sending our username, we are sending that player password hash, and we're writing that all to object controller socket. Cool. So the way I want this story to work now that we have registration and login as two separate entities, I want to create some sort of extra page where the user can choose whether he wants to register or log in. And while doing that, I don't want to create extra buttons to get us to these pages. So I'm actually going to be reusing these, this object button login and object button register, but we're going to be determining which page we're on. Then that is going to then determine which page we go to or what kind of action we're trying to do. So I'm going to add a condition here that says something like if room equals rm login, which doesn't exist yet. So if we're in the login room, well then do some validation and determine if we can log in. If we're not in room login, well, simply go to it. And we'll create those rooms later. Now, because I'm doing this for the login button, I need to do this for the register button too. So let's go there to register button, btn register. Let's go into here. Alright, let's make this bigger. Here I'm going to add the condition if room equals room register. There we go. Then do our validation and attempt to register a new player. Otherwise, just as we did in login, let's go to that room. Room register. Cool, so that's all set up. So now let's put this at the back of our minds. We need to create a room called room login. We need to create a room, some sort of landing room where we get to and the player can choose what he wants to do. And we'll take it from there. Cool, so let's save this. Cool, so we mustn't forget to add the sprite to our new button. Sprite button login. There we go. Cool, so that's all set up. So I'm going to take advantage of this point where we are splitting up our registration and our login rooms to create a boot room also. And the boot room currently isn't going to do anything. It's just going to take us to the next room. But at a later stage, maybe we want to initialize some global variables. And this boot room is going to be the best place to do that. So actually, I'm going to duplicate... let me delete this. Duplicate the game world so that I have everything we need. Also, let's move it to the top. Let's call it room boot. Okay, now remember when we made this controller persistent. So we create it once at some point in time, and it'll always be available to every other instance of every other object throughout the game's runtime. I must stress that this sounds fantastic, and it kind of is, but do note that these things never get deleted unless you actually delete them. So rooms change, they are still alive and using memory. So only make objects persistent if you really know that they have to be used throughout the game. In this case, the controller has to be persistent, otherwise every time we go to a new room, our server is going to be getting a new connection. And we don't want all these phantom connections happening. So I'm going to move the controller from our register room into our boot room. So let's open the boot room up. Let's grab the object controller, smack it over there. And the user's never going to see this room, so let's make sure that we go into creation. And get rid of this. And we title to room. Go to room. Let's see, it's going to be like a select. Let's say room, login, register, select. And we're going to semicolon on that. Let's grab this, copy that. Cool. So as soon as we get here, it's going to be creating an instance of object controller. That's going to be sitting in memory forever. It's going to redirect us to a room that I'm actually going to create it to. Let's duplicate this. Delete that, obviously. This is going to be called room login register select. Make this bigger. Remove that grid. So this is where we're going to add certain stuff. So button register. Oh, not that. Button register as well as button login. Cool. So when we get to this, we'll be able to choose what we want to do, and those are going to direct us to the associated pages. Okay, so let's create a login room. I'm going to duplicate the register room. It's very useful. Room login. So now that we've got this login room, the code within this here, oh, not that, will work. This will change to red as soon as we create it, which is really cool. Okay, let's make this bigger. So what do we need in this room? Let's go to objects. If we look at the bottom now, it's text box username. This one's password 1, and this one's password 2. So let's delete password 2. Let's delete our registration button. Let's go to objects. Let's add our login button over here. So these down. That looks fine. Cool. So we're going to enter some text for our username. We're going to enter some text for our password. Then we're going to click login, and it's going to put us in there. All right. Let's save this. Alright, so let's jump back into the whole networking side of this tutorial. We're going to be going to object button login. Let's go in here. Why does it keep doing that? We are going to go into our left pressed script. Let's see what we got. Okay, so it's doing the validation and then it's trying to log in. So what we're doing here is we're sending a username, we're sending a password hash, and we're sending the 3. So it's going to be a 3, the username and the password, and sending that to the socket. So now we're going to go over to the server. Remember that? It's a 3. We're going to be going to open up the scripts. We're going to go into script handle incoming packets. Cool, and this is where we're going to do the magic. So let's add our skeleton. Cool. One thing I want to do here is just fix some things from my last tutorial. I got so involved with the magic that is this line of code over here that I actually got the next one wrong. This is actually supposed to be if player exists equals false as a string, not false as a boolean. So don't forget that. Also, when we're opening up our any file over here, what happens if the player does exist? and we send a failed response, this any file is still going to be open. So I need to actually shift this any close down below this conditional block. See? So no matter what happens, we're always closing that any file. Cool, so now that we've got that out of the way, I'm going to go to case 3. We need to read in exactly the things as we did here. So we've got our username, we've got our password hash, and we've got some sort of response. So what do we need to do? We need to check if player exists. And then we need to send a response. Also, let's do this over here. Just give it a little comment saying that this is a login request. Cool. Alright, check if player exists. So again, we are opening up the any file over here. We're also saying var player exists equals any read string users player username false over here. Then we are saying if player exists is not equal to the string false. So that means if we do get something back, then it means that the player does exist. There's some information there. Then response here is going to equal 1. And then I'm going to close the any file. One thing actually that I noticed here is we're reading from that any file a string from the users section, but I'm writing to a user section. So let's just change that to users. That should be the same as that. Cool. Okay, let's go back down here. So here we go. We have a response of 0. It does some stuff. And if the user is found, it sets response to 1. So all we're going to do over here is just send that response. So let's copy this. Paste it in there. We are writing a 3 again. Remember, let's write what we read. Keep things the same. Cool. We're writing our response to our socket. Awesome stuff. So let's go through that again. In our client side, the user inputs some stuff. He presses the button login. It does some validation. If it passes, it's going to send a 3, the player username, and the player password hash to the server. So remember 3. So that's going to be sailing on into our controller over here in our server. Okay, it's going to get into the networking event, which is going to be sent into script handle incoming packets right over here. So let's go to that script. That's going to come down over here. That's going to extract the 3. It's going to get to our switch. It's going to say not 1, not a 2, but a 3. Here we go. This is what we want. It's going to be reading in the username. It's going to be reading in the password hash. It's going to be initializing our response to 0, in other words, a fail. We're going to see if the player exists, and we're going to be doing some stuff and sending that response. Okay, so now at this point in time, we know that the player exists. So that's one part of what it takes to log in. The second part is actually comparing the password that the user inputted to the password we have stored, but in this case it's going to be the password hash. So above response 1, I'm going to say if password hash equals. Now the thing is that this line over here, 47, is actually going to be getting our password. So I'm going to open up that ini file. I'm going to show you exactly what's stored in there. So here it is, the user's ini file. This is what it's opening over here at line 46. We have a username, Billy, so that's a key. We have a value, which is Billy's password hash. And what we're doing here on line 47 is you're saying var player exists equals any read string users, so that's the section from this user section, read the player name. So if we get to this part and player name equals Billy, then we're going to be bringing in the value. So in actual fact, this player exists variable is going to equal this password. But player exists isn't exactly a very good name for it. So I'm going to change it to player password or player stored password. So if that is not equal to false, well, then we can do some other stuff. Okay, cool. So at this point in time, we're reading in his password from his data structure. And I'm going to say, well, if the password hash that he sent through to us is the same, bam, then response equals 1. Okay, so we have the full story. We've checked that he does exist, and we've checked that the passwords match. And in that case, it's going to be saying, okay, response is 1, let's move on and send our response, and that's going to be a 1. Cool. So that wraps up everything we need to do for the server. Let's close, minimize that. Let's save everything. Let's jump back to our client. Okay, so that response, let's assume that it's successful. That's a 1. It's going to be coming all the way back to our client. It's going to hit the controller, get to our networking event. It's going to be handled by the one and only event type that we are looking at. And it's going to be passed into the handle incoming packets. Okay, let's go into there. Make this bigger. Cool. So that was a case of 3. There's our skeleton. We're going to do the same here. We're grabbing the response. And this is a login request. Oh, this one is actually a registration request. I don't know why I didn't put that in before. Cool. We're also switching on our response. There. Cool. Failure. So this is going to be login failed. Username doesn't exist. Or password is incorrect. So at this point in time, you could always send different responses. 0 could be username doesn't exist. A 1 could be passwords are invalid. And then a 2 could be a success. But in this case, I'm just wrapping up a failure into a 0 right over there. Cool. So in this case of 1, success means go to the game world. Alright. So that's all good news, guys. We are pretty much done with everything. We're inputting some stuff. We are attempting to log in, and things are happening. So now what I want to do is just make sure our rooms are correct. We've got the boot room over here. Let's see what it does. Just sends us to the login register select room. Later on, we'll add some globals and stuff there. Notice the boot room now has the controller. And that's persistent still. Our room login register select has register and login, so we can choose where we want to go. And those buttons are going to take us to those rooms, or are going to attempt to do those actions depending on which rooms we're in. So in this case, in this room, it's just going to redirect us to another room. If this button was in the register room, it'll attempt to register. If the login button was in the login room, it will attempt to log in. But in this room, it's going to take us to login. Cool. Our register room is pretty straightforward. We've got let's go to objects, we've got a username, we've got a password 1, and we've got our password 2. And we register, it's going to be doing our validation, it's going to be registering a new player. Let's go to login. So our login room only requires 2 input fields. We have our username and we have a password. And we click login, it's going to be sending those to our server, and if it succeeds, it's going to be sending us to the game world. So let's go to the game world. And I remember that here in the creation code I was having, I had a show notification. I'm going to say registration or login successful. Alright, so what I'm going to do is let's fire this up. Let's create a new user, because I can't remember what Billy's password was. Could have been 1235, it doesn't matter. So let's fire up our server. Let's fire up our client. It probably would have been a good idea to add a back button. Cool, here we go. So we've got the server on the left, client on our right. We have the register and login buttons. So I can't remember what Billy's password was. So let's register a new player. There we go, registration room. Things are still working. Sam's password is going to be 12345. Confirmed with 12345. Cool, so this is going to automatically take us to the game world. Done. Registration or login successful. So what we've just done now is we've proven that everything that we've done in this video hasn't broken everything we did in part 2, so that's really great. So let's fire up the client again. So if I exit this, it's going to be simulating a logout. Watch, our client's 1 is going to drop to 0. Cool, so let's run the client again, and let's try login as Sam. So I'm going to go to local app data and our project name. Let's bring this across. If we go in here, so C users, your username, app data, local, and the name of your server project. And here we have the users ini file. If I go in there, bring this across, you can see that we have a new user, Sam 2F2416BA3BCF5DB186 blah 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 blah. So you can see that this one is the same as Billy's. So obviously Billy's password was also 12345. Cool. So I'm going to exit this, minimize that. Let's try login as Sam. Login. Let's give it a random username. So we've come across one problem. On click, it's saying unable to find any instance for object index 2. Add GML object, text box username, left button pressed, line 6. It's looking for object text box password 2 dot selected equals false. Okay, so here's one thing that we didn't factor in. Remember when we were clicking these things and it was changing which one was selected? We need to make sure that it's only deselecting the other boxes if they are in existence. So let's abort. Let's go back to our client. If we open up our objects, so we're going to go into menus and we need to now open up all our input objects. So that was text box password 2. In our common, we should have the username and password 1. Cool. So in left pressed, let's open these up. Here we go. We need to now say, well, do they exist? So in this case, password 2 might not exist. Put it here. Put that in there. I'm only going to do them for objects that I know might not exist at certain points in time. For example, password 2 will not exist with password 1 if we're in the login screen. Okay, so that's what we need to do there. Let's go left press to the username, see what this is. Password 1 and password 2. Again, this one's not going to exist. Password 2. Do that. There we go. Cool. Let's actually copy this just in case we have to do it again. And password 2. This is fine. Both of these exist where password 2 exists. Alright, so let's save. Let's run this again. Here we go. We are connected again. Let's try login. So let's just check out our validation. Let's try login as some random person that we know doesn't exist with a random password. Login. Login failed. Username doesn't exist. Or password is incorrect. Okay, that kind of stretched off the screen a bit, but validation was fine. So now let's enter a user we do know exists, but the password is wrong. Sam 54321. Login. Login failed. Username doesn't exist or password is incorrect. See? So again, the validation worked. So now let's log in as Sam and give the right password. 12345. Login. There, registration or login successful. We have successfully entered what could be our main menu because the login matched the registration that Sam made moments ago, and there we go. All the validation passed. We are in the system. Cool, so that's pretty much it, guys. Pretty straightforward stuff. So now that you have a good idea of how we need to do registration and login, obviously you're going to be needing to add certain other things to your own project. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it both educational and helpful. Please feel free to comment, rate, and subscribe for more of the very best GameMaker tutorials. So I'm still deciding on what kind of game we're going to be making. I don't want to do a top-down shooter again. I mean, we've got a lot of top-down tutorial stuff on my channel. I want to do something different, spice it up a little. What I have noticed is that there are a whole lot of platform RPG tutorial series out there, but none of them cover networking. So what I'm going to do is with this one, I'm leaning towards the registration and login into a platform series. So that's going to be pretty cool. I'm sure a lot of you are excited about that. If you liked this tutorial, many of my other ones, especially this new series, please check out my Patreon campaign. I do appreciate your support through that, and you can also support this channel by sharing my work around the internet, help me grow. You can find the project files straight in the description. If you need any help or you've got some sort of weird error and you don't understand, just post it in the comment section. I can get back to you, or someone else who's following the series can also get back to you and help you out. So until next time, happy coding, and I'll see you then.